Alright, here it goes. I'm Sam, 38. My life was predictable. I worked the same job for 10 years, lived in the same house for 8, and spent 6 of those years in a marriage that, if I'm being honest, died long before the divorce papers came through. My ex-wife, Amy, and I had fallen into this dull, lifeless routine. Work, home, maybe a forced date night every few months to pretend we still had something. But I was committed. I didn't believe in giving up on marriage. Turns out, Amy had a different approach. I found out about her affair in the worst way possible. I came home early one evening after my boss let me go early from a meeting. Walked in, and there she was, laughing, wrapped up in some other guy's arms, completely comfortable in the home we built together. She wasn't even sneaky about it. Didn't look shocked, didn't scramble for an excuse. She just stared at me like I was the problem for showing up unannounced. I didn't yell. Didn't cause a scene. Just stood there numb. She had this stupid smirk, like she had been waiting for me to catch on for months. "Sam, let's talk about this like adults," she said, adjusting her robe like I was interrupting her night. "Like adults?" I repeated, still processing. "You mean like how you've been sneaking around behind my back for who knows how long?" She sighed, acting inconvenienced. "You're always at work. We haven't been happy for years. I didn't plan for this to happen." That last line sent something snapping inside me. The way she said it, calm, unapologetic, like it wasn't even a betrayal. Just a logical conclusion to our failing marriage. I left that night. Packed a bag and crashed at a motel. Divorce was quick. Amy wanted out, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to fight. She got the house, and I took what I needed. My friends told me I should have fought harder, but what was the point? I wasn't about to start a war over a place that felt empty anyway. The real kicker? That wasn't the last I'd see of Amy. Not even close. Because 6 months later, my company merged with another. And Amy became my new boss. You ever have one of those moments where the universe just decides to spit in your face? That was me, standing in the conference room of my company, watching the new leadership introduce themselves. And there she was. Amy. Smiling. Confident. Acting like she hadn't torn my life apart. I didn't even know she worked for the company we merged with. Hell, I had been doing my best to forget she existed. And now? Now she was my boss. The first time we locked eyes, she barely reacted. Maybe a flicker of surprise, but mostly? She was in full professional mode, like we were just two colleagues meeting for the first time. "Sam," she said with a nod, like she was greeting an old neighbor instead of her ex-husband. "I see we'll be working together." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought I might break a tooth. "Yeah, guess so." She smiled, like this was some kind of joke. The next few weeks were unbearable. Amy strutted around the office like she owned the place. I tried to stay out of her way, keep my head down, just do my job. But she made it impossible. Meetings? She always found a way to single me out. Emails? She copied me on everything, whether I needed to be involved or not. One-on-one evaluations? Oh, she loved those. The worst part was how she treated me in front of others. Fake friendly, all professional and charming. But behind closed doors, she'd slip in little digs. "You seem a little tense, Sam. Still adjusting. Just want to make sure you can keep up with the changes. I hope this isn't awkward for you." She was enjoying this. I could see it in her eyes. She loved having the power, being in control. And me? I was miserable. I tried to tough it out. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized, I wasn't just working under Amy. I was letting her win. She took my marriage, my home, and now, she was going to take my peace of mind too? No. That's when I made my decision. I was done. The breaking point came on a Monday. Typical, right? Amy had scheduled a last-minute performance review for me. Just me. Nobody else on my team. I walked into her office, already knowing it was going to be another one of her little power trips. She sat behind her desk, flipping through a file like she was some big shotsu instead of the same woman who used to leave wet towels on the bed and steal fries off my plate. She motioned for me to sit. "Let's talk about your future here, Sam." I sat but didn't say a word. Just stared at her, waiting. She leaned forward. "You've been distant. I understand this transition hasn't been easy for you, Not sure what you mean, I said flatly. Her lips curved into that smug little smirk I hated. I mean, I know it must be difficult for you, working under me. Given our history. I exhaled sharply through my nose. You don't need to worry about me, Amy. I do my job. She tapped her fingers on her desk. Yes, but the question is, are you happy here? That was it. That was the moment I knew I was done. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and gave her a look. You know what? I'm not. She blinked. Excuse me. I stood up, adjusting my tie. I quit. For the first time, Amy actually looked surprised. Sam, don't be rash. We're in the middle of a merger. I cut her off. Yeah. And this is the perfect time for a fresh start. She stared at me, searching for something to say. Maybe she thought I'd stick around forever, just another piece on her chessboard. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I turned and walked out. Just like that. No 2-week notice. No second thoughts. Just freedom. Walking out of that office felt like taking my first real breath in years. No more Amy. No more soul-sucking job. Just possibilities. Of course, reality hit pretty fast. I didn't have another job lined up. No plan. Just savings and a gut feeling that anything was better than staying. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I packed a bag and left town. 3 months. 3 whole months of just me. No schedules. No expectations. Just traveling, hopping from city to city, staying in little motels, renting a car and driving wherever I felt like going. I hiked through national parks. Ate at diners where nobody knew my name. Met people who weren't connected to my past in any way. And slowly, the bitterness started to fade. Amy? She became more like a bad memory instead of an open wound. I stopped replaying our conversations. Stopped wondering how she could betray me so easily. Then one evening, I found myself in a small lakeside town. The kind of place where life moved slow, where people actually knew their neighbors. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I thought, maybe I'll stay, so I stayed. I rented a little cabin near the lake. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Quiet. Peaceful. The kind of place where I could hear myself think. For the first few days, I just enjoyed not being anywhere near my old life. No emails, no fake smiles in the office, no Amy lurking around the corner. Just me, a fishing rod I barely knew how to use, and the occasional deer staring at me like I didn't belong. Then, I wandered into town. It was small. The kind of place with one main street lined with family-owned shops, a post office, and a diner where the waitresses called you Han whether they knew you or not. It was different. Slower. Exactly what I needed. That's when I saw her. Vivian. She was standing behind the counter of this little general store, balancing a baby on her hip while trying to ring up an old man's groceries. She looked exhausted, but still managed to give him a smile. I was just passing by, but something made me stop. Maybe it was how familiar she looked, not in a we've met before way, but in a real way. Like someone who had been through it. Someone who understood what it meant to rebuild. I didn't know it yet, but meeting her? That was about to change everything. I wasn't planning to go inside. But something about that tiny shop, with its old wooden shelves and the bell that jingled when someone walked in, felt welcoming. So I stepped in. Vivian barely noticed me at first. She was too busy wrestling a can of formula away from her baby, who was determined to chew on it. She sighed, gently pried the can from tiny fingers, and turned to me with an apologetic smile. Sorry about that. He's in a grab-everything phase. I shrugged. At least he's got good taste. She smirked, clearly not convinced formula was gourmet. What can I help you with? I glanced around, realizing I had no idea what I was even looking for. Just checking out the town. Thought I'd stop in. She studied me for a second. Not in the way Amy used to, like she was calculating something. Vivian just looked curious. Like she was trying to place me. You're new, she said finally. Yeah. Just moved in. That got a little spark of interest. Oh? Where? Cabin near the lake. Her eyebrows lifted. The blue one with the porch? I nodded. She let out a low whistle. Brave. That place has been empty for years. Should I be worried? I joked. Haunted. Vivian grinned. Only if you count raccoons. But they were there first, so technically, you're haunting them. I actually laughed. First real laugh in a while. Then the baby smacked her cheek with his chubby little hand, making her wince. "All right, buddy," message received. She shifted him to her other hip. "I'm Vivian, by the way. Sam." And just like that, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Like maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was the start of something real. After that first visit, I kept finding excuses to stop by Vivian's shop. At first, it was little things, buying coffee, a loaf of bread, some batteries I didn't actually need. But after a few days, it became more than that. Vivian ran the store almost entirely on her own. I noticed how she was always rushing, juggling the baby, stocking shelves, running the register. The exhaustion was written all over her face, but she never complained. One afternoon, I walked in and saw her trying to carry a huge box while bouncing the baby on her hip. The kid was fussing, and she looked like she was one bad moment away from dropping everything. Without thinking, I stepped in. "Here, let me get that." She hesitated for a second, like she wasn't used to people offering help, then sighed and handed the box over. "Thanks. You looking for anything?" I set the box down near the counter. "Not really. Just figured I'd stop by." She gave me a knowing look. "You're either really bored, or you feel sorry for me." "Little bit of both," I admitted with a smirk. That actually made her laugh. After that, I started helping out more. Nothing big, just stocking shelves, carrying heavy stuff, fixing the old freezer in the back when it started making a noise that definitely wasn't normal. Vivian tried to pay me once, but I waved her off. "Just something to do," I said. Truth was, it felt good to be needed. To have a reason to wake up in the morning besides just existing. And Vivian? She didn't push. Didn't pry into my past. She just let me be. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just some guy getting through the day. I was part of something again. Life in the lakeside town started feeling normal. I had a routine, mornings at the cabin, afternoons helping Vivian at the shop, evenings by the lake, just sitting with my thoughts. And for the first time in years, my thoughts weren't all about Amy. But of course, the past never stays buried for long. It started with a text from an old coworker, Jake. "Jake, dude. You're not gonna believe what's happening at the office." I stared at my phone for a solid minute before replying. Let me guess. Amy being Amy? Jake, worse. Half the department quit. She's running the place into the ground. I wasn't surprised. I could have told them all this would happen. Amy was great at pretending she had everything under control, but when it came down to actually leading, disaster. I should have just ignored it. Should have put my phone down and gone back to unloading boxes at the shop. But I didn't. I let Jake fill me in. Turns out, the company was spiraling. Amy was making terrible decisions, driving people away left and right. She had fired 2 senior managers over nonsense, and instead of replacing them, she just dumped all their work on people who were already drowning. "Jake, she's losing it, man. People are saying she's not sleeping, snapping at everyone. Even HR is getting complaints." I won't lie. A small, petty part of me enjoyed hearing it. The same woman who used to smirk at me from across her desk, who acted like she was untouchable. Now she was the one struggling. But another part of me felt nothing. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Like justice had been served. Instead, I just felt tired. That night, I sat by the lake, watching the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. Amy was destroying herself. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. Not my problem anymore. I had my own life now. And that life? It was just getting started. After Jake's text, I did something surprising. I put my phone down and went back to unloading boxes at the shop. No deep dive into office gossip, no endless rehashing of Amy's downfall in my head. Just kept moving. That felt new. For the first time since the divorce, Amy's problems weren't my problems. She was burning her own bridges, and I was too far away to feel the heat. But that didn't mean she was done with me. A few days later, I was behind the counter at the shop, trying to fix the ancient register that kept freezing, when Vivian walked in from the back room, wiping her hands on a towel. "You got a visitor," she said casually. I frowned. Who? She nodded toward the door. And just like that, my past was standing right there. Amy. She looked different. Not in a dramatic way, but enough that I noticed. Her usually perfect hair was just a little messy. Dark circles under her eyes. The confidence, that smug, calculating look she always wore, gone. I didn't say anything. Just crossed my arms and waited. Amy let out a breath and gave a small, tired smile. Hey, Sam. Vivian looked between us, sensing the weird tension, then patted my arm. I'll be in the back if you need me. She wasn't nosy, but she wasn't stupid either. She could tell something was off. Amy shifted her weight, glancing around the shop like she was stalling. Nice place. Yeah, I said flatly. Her eyes flickered toward the counter. Didn't know you were working here. I'm not. Just helping out. She nodded like that somehow made sense, then sighed. Look, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. I said nothing. She took a step closer. I wanted to talk. Can we? I stared at her. The woman who had torn my life apart, humiliated me, treated me like I was some disposable thing, now standing in front of me like she was the one searching for answers. Maybe before, I would have jumped at the chance to hear her out. To get some kind of closure. But now? I didn't need it. Still, some part of me was curious. Fine, I said finally. But make it quick. We sat at a little picnic table outside the shop. Amy folded her hands on the table, fidgeting in a way I had never seen before. She was always so in control, so sure of herself. Seeing her like this? It was weird. I heard you left, she started. Yeah. She looked at me, searching my face. No warning. Just quit. I shrugged. Wasn't exactly a place I wanted to be anymore. Amy exhaled sharply. I know I made things difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult? That was one way to put it. I just gave her a look. She looked down, tapping her fingers against the table. I messed up. I raised an eyebrow. Which time? That made her wince. There it was. The guilt. The regret. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, Amy realizing she was wrong, coming back to apologize, admitting she destroyed everything for nothing. But now that it was actually happening, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt sad. I thought I had it all figured out, she admitted. I thought I could move on, that I'd be happier. But, she trailed off, shaking her head. Turns out I'm not as good at this as I thought. I leaned back, studying her. Why are you really here, Amy? She swallowed, hesitating. Then finally she said it. I lost everything. I didn't react. Just waited. She let out a bitter laugh. The job? It's a disaster. The board's losing confidence in me. Half the staff quit. And my personal life. She looked away. Let's just say I made some bad choices. I knew what that meant. The guy she cheated with? That didn't last. Maybe she thought leaving me would lead to some perfect new life. Maybe she believed the grass was greener. Now? She was realizing it wasn't. I should have felt satisfied. Like karma had finally done its job. But I didn't. All I felt was relief, not because she was suffering, but because I didn't care anymore. I met her eyes. I'm sorry you're struggling, Amy. But that's not my problem. She blinked, like she hadn't expected me to be so detached. Sam, No, I cut in. You don't get to come here and unload your regrets on me. Not after everything. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I stood up. I moved on, Amy. You should too. And with that, I walked back inside, leaving her sitting there. Vivian was behind the counter when I stepped back in. She didn't say anything at first, just raised an eyebrow. That your ex? Yep. She studied me for a moment. You okay? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I nodded. Yeah, I am. And for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. After Amy left, I expected to feel something. Anger. Satisfaction. Closure. But all I felt was relief. Not because she was suffering, because I was finally free. And once I realized that, my life in the lakeside town really started. I spent more and more time at the shop. What started as small favors turned into a regular thing. Stocking shelves, fixing things, keeping an eye on Vivian's baby when she needed a break. At first, she resisted. "I can't just let you work here for free," she argued one afternoon. "I'm not working. Just helping," I said, placing a box of canned goods on a shelf. She crossed her arms. "So you're saying I could just leave and go get a massage, and you'd run the place for me?" I shrugged. "If you want." She studied me for a second. "That's weird, Sam." I smirked. "You're welcome." She rolled her eyes but didn't push it. The more time we spent together, the more I learned about her. She had moved to town 4 years ago with her husband. They'd bought the shop together, planning to turn it into a family business. But then, a year ago, he passed away. Sudden. Unexpected. Now, it was just her and the baby. She didn't talk about it much, but when she did, I saw that same look in her eyes that I had seen in the mirror for months: loss, exhaustion, and the quiet determination to keep going anyway. One evening, after we locked up, we sat on the front steps of the store. "I thought about leaving," she admitted, watching the sky turn pink over the lake. I glanced at her. "Why didn't you?" She sighed. "Because this was our dream. And leaving felt like giving up on it." I nodded, understanding in a way I didn't expect. Sometimes, you don't stay because it's easy. You stay because it's yours. One night, after a long day at the shop, Vivian and I found ourselves sitting by the lake. The baby was asleep in his stroller, and for once, neither of us were in a rush to be anywhere. "You ever think about dating again?" she asked suddenly. I hesitated. "Honestly, I haven't really thought about it." She nodded, staring at the water. "Yeah, me neither." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there. Then she looked at me. "But if I did, I think I'd want it to be with someone who understands." Her words lingered in the air between us. I didn't say anything, just reached over, covering her hand with mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was stuck in the past. I felt like I was finally moving forward. After that night by the lake, something shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden confessions, no rushing into anything. Just an understanding. A quiet acknowledgement that we weren't just two people helping each other out anymore. We were something more. Vivian and I kept things the same, working at the shop, sitting by the lake, sharing quiet conversations after long days. But there was an undeniable change. The way she'd smile a little longer when I walked in. The way our hands would brush when we worked side by side. The way I caught myself looking forward to seeing her, even when I wasn't at the shop. One night, as we were closing up, she stretched her arms over her head, letting out a long sigh. "God, I'm exhausted. Long day." I asked, locking the register. She groaned. "Long week. Long year. Long life." I smirked. "I think that just means you need a break." She snorted. "Yeah, let me just schedule one between diaper changes and inventory restocks." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What if I made you take one?" She raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? You gonna babysit the shop and the baby?" I shrugged. "Maybe." Her lips twitched, like she was trying not to smile. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She stared at me for a moment, like she was weighing whether or not to actually let herself accept help. Then finally she sighed. "All right," she said. "You win. One day off." I grinned. "Good. I'll even make it official." I grabbed a sticky note, scribbled Vivian's day off, by order of management, and slapped it onto the counter. She laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." I just winked. "You're welcome." Vivian's day off turned into something else entirely. She didn't go out of town. Didn't book a massage or spend the day catching up on sleep. Instead, she spent it with me. We grabbed coffee at the diner, took a long walk by the lake, talked about things we hadn't before, our pasts, our regrets, our hopes. And by the time the sun started setting, I realized something. I hadn't thought about Amy once. Not once. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward. I was looking forward. And everything about that felt right. After Vivian's day off, something between us settled into place. We still weren't calling it anything, not yet, but it was there. A quiet understanding. A feeling that neither of us needed to rush into anything, because whatever this was, it wasn't going anywhere. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel restless. I wasn't waiting for the next bad thing to happen. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, expecting another betrayal. I was just living. Until the past came knocking. It had been weeks since I last heard from her. Weeks since she showed up at the shop, full of regret and self-pity. I thought maybe, finally, she was gone for good. Then one night, my phone buzzed. A number I hadn't saved, but still recognized. Amy, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I stared at the message. For a long time, I didn't answer. Didn't even want to read whatever she had to say. But against my better judgment, I let my curiosity win. She sent a long text. A really long text. Some apology. Some half-explanation. She admitted she ruined everything, said she didn't know what she was thinking when she cheated, that she thought she wanted something new, only to realize, too late, that she already had the best thing in her life and threw it away. And then came the part that made me pause. Amy, I made a mistake, Sam. I don't expect you to forgive me, but if there's even a small chance that we could. I stopped reading. Blocked the number. Deleted the text. And just like that, I let her go. For real this time. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Not because Amy was finally out of my life. Because she didn't matter anymore. She could beg. She could regret. She could spend the rest of her life wishing she'd made different choices. But that wasn't my problem. I wasn't her safety net. I wasn't her second option. I had my own life now. A town I called home. A woman who, though we hadn't said anything out loud yet, was becoming more than just a friend. That day, I walked into Vivian's shop, feeling free. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I realized. I was finally happy. After deleting Amy's message. I expected to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, even a little bit of guilt. But I didn't. I just felt done. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was actually living. That night, I went to the shop like I always did. Vivian was behind the counter, balancing the baby on her hip while ringing up an old couple. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. Not the polite, distant smile she gave customers, but a real one. One meant just for me. It hit me then, how natural this had become. How good it felt to walk in and see her. How I wasn't forcing myself to move on, I already had. After she closed up, we sat outside on the shop's front steps, like we'd done so many nights before. This time, though, there was something different in the air. "You've been quiet," Vivian said, nudging my knee with hers. I glanced at her. Just thinking. "Dangerous," she teased, taking a sip from the soda can in her hand. I smirked. "I got a text from Amy last night." Vivian didn't react much. Just raised an eyebrow. And I deleted it. Now she reacted. Not in a big way, just a small approving smile. Good. I studied her for a second. The way the streetlights caught in her hair. The way she wasn't prying, wasn't asking for details, just letting me be. "Viv," I said, my voice quieter than I meant. She looked at me, and in that moment I just knew. I leaned in. She did too. And then finally, I kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was real. When we pulled away, she let out a small breathless laugh. "Took you long enough." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Guess I had to be sure." "And?" she asked, tilting her head. I met her eyes, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I'm sure. After the kiss, neither of us moved. We just sat there on the front steps of the shop, the warm glow from the streetlights casting soft shadows around us. The town was quiet, the lake in the distance shimmering under the moon. Everything felt still, like the whole world had paused, waiting to see what would happen next. Vivian's eyes stayed on mine, searching. Not scared, not uncertain, just cautious. Like she was trying to figure out if this was real. And honestly, I didn't blame her. I had been through hell. She had been through hell. We were two people who had lost too much, who had built walls around ourselves because trusting again felt impossible. But right now, sitting here with her, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. I felt safe. Vivian took a breath, her fingers still curled around mine. You sure about this? I knew she wasn't just asking about the kiss. She was asking if I was really here, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. If I was still tangled up in my past. If I was ready to let go and actually be with her, instead of just using her as an escape from everything that had happened before. I tightened my grip on her hand, making sure she felt it. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Vivian studied me for a second longer, and then, finally, she nodded. Okay. It was just one word, but it meant everything. We sat like that for a while, neither of us speaking. We didn't need to. The night stretched out around us, the distant sound of crickets filling the air. The lights from the shop flickered slightly, and the breeze coming off the lake was cool against my skin. For the first time in a long time, I felt present. Not stuck in memories. Not lost in regret. Just here. Eventually, Vivian leaned into me, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. I wasn't expecting this, she admitted softly. I turned my head slightly, catching the faint scent of her shampoo. Me neither. She let out a small, tired laugh. Guess life's funny like that. I smiled. Yeah, it is. She didn't pull away. Didn't overthink it. And neither did I. For so long, my life had been defined by what I lost. Amy's betrayal. The divorce. The feeling that I had wasted years of my life on someone who didn't deserve me. But sitting here, with Vivian tucked against me, her breathing slow and steady, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about Amy anymore. Not in a bitter way. Not even in a look how much better off I am now way. I just didn't care. She was my past. Vivian was my present. And maybe, just maybe, she was my future too. But even with that realization, I knew this wasn't some fairy tale moment where everything magically fell into place. Vivian had been through her own losses. Her own heartbreak. She had spent the last year doing everything on her own, raising her son, running the shop, trying to hold it all together without falling apart. She wasn't looking for some temporary fix. And I wasn't about to rush into something just because it felt good in the moment. So instead of making promises, instead of talking about what this meant, I just wrapped an arm around her shoulders and held her close. Viv, I said quietly. She hummed in response, her body relaxing against mine. I don't know what this is yet, I admitted. But I know I don't want it to be temporary. She didn't say anything right away. But after a moment, she turned her head slightly, looking up at me. Her eyes were soft, open. Me neither. And that was enough. The night stretched on, but neither of us moved. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a hurry to figure everything out. I wasn't searching for some big revelation or some grand moment of clarity. I was just here. With her. And for once? That was enough. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not in a dramatic way. The sun still rose, the lake still stretched out calm and endless outside my cabin window, and the town still moved at its slow, steady rhythm. But inside me? Something had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up with that heavy weight in my chest. No bitterness, no lingering anger, no ghosts of my past whispering in my ear. Just a quiet, steady feeling. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And a big part of that was Vivian. I headed to the shop earlier than usual. Not because she needed me, but because I wanted to be there. When I walked in, she was behind the counter, balancing the baby on her hip while writing something down in a notebook. The moment she saw me, a slow smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that makes a person feel like they belong. "Morning," she said, her voice warm. "Morning," I replied, already feeling more at home here than I ever had at my old job. She gestured to the coffee pot on the counter. "Figured you'd show up early, so I made an extra cup." I smirked, grabbing the mug. "So you're saying I'm predictable?" She shrugged playfully. "I'm saying you like routine." She wasn't wrong. But for the first time, my routine wasn't something I felt trapped in. It was something I was choosing. Later that afternoon, I got an unexpected call. It was from Jake, my old coworker. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. "Hey man," Jake said. "Just wanted to let you know, Amy's officially gone." I blinked. "Gone?" "She quit," he explained. "Didn't even fight it. Board had a meeting, and she resigned before they could fire her. Packed up her office and left." I waited for some kind of reaction to hit me. Shock. satisfaction, a petty sense of victory. But none of it came. All I felt was nothing. Figured you'd want to know, Jake continued. After everything, you deserve to hear it. Appreciate it, I said. But honestly, I don't care. Jake let out a low chuckle. Yeah, man. I kinda figured. And that was it. The last conversation I would ever have about Amy. The last time I would even think about her in any way that mattered. I had finally, truly moved on that night. I found myself by the lake again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Vivian sat beside me, her son asleep in her arms, his tiny hand curled into her sweater. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded. Yeah. Just thinking about. I glanced at her, at the way the moonlight reflected in her eyes. My old life, I admitted. How for a long time, I thought that was all I'd ever have. That it was my only shot at happiness, and when it fell apart, I thought that was it for me. She was quiet, listening. She always listened. But now. I exhaled, looking out over the water. Now I realized that losing everything wasn't the end. It was just clearing the way for something better. She smiled. And this? This is better. I turned to her, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me, I said simply. She didn't say anything right away. Just leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking ahead to what came next. I wasn't waiting for things to fall apart. I wasn't haunted by what I had lost. Because I had everything I needed. Right here a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be here, sitting by a lake in a quiet little town, holding hands with a woman who made me feel alive again, I wouldn't have believed them. Back then, my life was a cycle of resentment, regret, and routine. A job I didn't love, a marriage that had already crumbled long before I caught Amy cheating, and a version of myself that had been running on autopilot for years. I thought losing everything meant I had nothing left. I was wrong. Losing everything gave me a chance to start over. And this? This wasn't just a fresh start. This was home. Life didn't suddenly become a perfect fairy tale. Some days, the shop was a mess. Some nights, the baby wouldn't sleep. Some mornings, I still woke up with flashes of the past trying to creep in. But the difference now? I didn't let it consume me. I had something worth waking up for. Something worth staying for. Vivian and I never rushed things. After that first kiss, we just let things happen. Slowly, naturally. It was different from what I had with Amy. There was no pressure, no keeping score, no feeling like I had to prove my worth just to keep the relationship afloat. With Vivian, things felt easy. Not because life was easy, but because we chose each other every single day. One evening, we closed up the shop together. The baby, our baby now, was asleep in the stroller, and the town was settling into its usual peaceful quiet. Vivian locked the door, stretching with a yawn. Remind me why I still run this place. I smirked, tossing my arm around her shoulders. Because you're stubborn. She groaned. I hate that you're right. You love that I'm right. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. We walked back to the cabin together, the cool night air wrapping around us. Inside, the place looked different from when I first moved in. Back then, it had been just mine. A place I used to escape. A space that felt temporary. Now, there were toys scattered on the floor. A blanket draped over the couch where Vivian would curl up after long days. A framed photo on the mantel of the three of us at the lake, me, Vivian, and the baby, laughing in the sun. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Vivian looked around, shaking her head. You know, I thought I'd sell this place when I first moved here. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. She nodded. After James passed, it felt too big. Too much. I told myself I'd stick it out for a year, then leave. I glanced at her. And now? She smiled, looping her arms around my neck. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. I pulled her closer. Good. Because you're stuck with me. She smirked. Oh, am I? Yep. I kissed her forehead, breathing her in. Forever. Her smirk softened into something real. Something certain. I like the sound of that, she whispered. And just like that, I realized. The best things in life don't always happen the way you plan. Sometimes, they happen when everything falls apart. When you lose what you thought you needed. When you least expect it. And sometimes, they happen exactly when they're supposed to. Because right here, right now. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't running. I was home. Some people say life is about the big moments, the dramatic changes, the highs and lows that define everything. But after everything I'd been through, I realized something. Life isn't about the big moments. It's about the small ones. The quiet, everyday pieces that come together to create something real. And now? My life was full of them. Mornings weren't rushed anymore. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee, the soft sound of Vivian humming in the kitchen. Sometimes I'd find the baby, our baby, curled up between us in bed, his tiny fingers gripping my shirt. I never thought I'd be a father figure. Never thought I'd love a kid that wasn't biologically mine. But then he'd reach up for me with those sleepy eyes, and it hit me every time. This was my family now. This was what mattered. The shop had become more than just a place I helped out at. It was ours now. Vivian still technically owned it, but she stopped arguing when I insisted on really working there. I even convinced her to take an actual day off every now and then, not that she ever really knew what to do with herself when she wasn't working. She'd grumble about it, say she didn't need a break. But then I'd catch her sneaking in an extra cup of coffee at the diner, chatting with the regulars, or reading by the lake while the baby napped in the stroller. And every time, she'd smile at me like she knew I was right but would never admit it. I didn't keep in touch with most people from my old life. Not because I was bitter. I just didn't need to anymore. Jake still texted me every now and then, updating me on the office drama I no longer cared about. Apparently, after Amy left, things actually got better. For a while, she tried to spin some story about how she was the victim, about how the company failed her. But no one bought it. Eventually, she disappeared completely. New city, new job, new people to fool. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting to hear about her downfall. I just didn't care. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vivian let out a deep breath. You know, she said, swirling her drink in her hand, I used to think love was supposed to be hard. I glanced at her. Hard. She nodded. Like the kind of thing you have to fight for every day. The kind that keeps you up at night, makes you question everything, makes you doubt yourself. I thought about that. Thought about Amy. How much effort I had put into making things work, even when they were clearly falling apart. How I had spent years thinking love meant sacrificing myself just to keep someone else happy. Vivian looked at me, her expression softer now. But with you? It's just easy. I smiled, reaching over to take her hand. Yeah, I said. It is. We sat in silence for a while, the baby asleep inside, the lake reflecting the last golden light of the day. And in that moment, I knew. I had finally stopped existing. I was living. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever it was, I wasn't facing it alone.